Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
What do you got there? Picture of a nuclear reactor?
It's a picture of Chernobyl, somewhat fancified, but it's a picture of Chernobyl melting down. And you know why that's relevant, Bob?
Because you're having a meltdown?
No, because of infrastructure. This weird thing happened this week where the Democrats sort of, apropos of nothing, where Nancy Pelosi tried to...
You know who that is on the phone, Mickey? You know who that is on the phone?
I think it's somebody calling for my father who died 25 years ago. So
I think it's somebody calling and asking you if we can hope that this will be the last week we have to talk about infrastructure. But go ahead.
It's going to go on forever.
No.
But here's why it might not go on forever. Anyway, she tries to bully the House progressives into approving the hard infrastructure bill before the soft infrastructure bill is ready. And she employs all sorts of bullshit to do this, including saying that they can count on the Senate to pass it, but then the Manchin and Sinema issue these wishy-washy statements, and then Bernie Sanders comes out and says, no, it's not good enough. She even stages a fake hearing in the Rules Committee where they're about to bring the big social spending bill that the progressives like to the floor, but it's just a hearing. They're not actually going to bring it to the floor. It's a complete fake. So the progressives didn't fall for it. And Biden even came down again and gave a talk to the House and didn't sway the progressives. Didn't turn out to even ask for their vote, bizarrely. And so why did they stage it? It wasn't because Biden was going to Glasgow and they didn't want him to go empty-handed. That was transparent bullshit. And the answer is they're worried about a
Chernobyl-like meltdown.
Chernobyl-like meltdown after Terry McAuliffe loses in Virginia. They're worried that...
Oh, you're predicting a Chernobyl-like meltdown.
I'm just saying what they were worried about. I actually don't know which way that's going, although the latest polls look terrible for McAuliffe. He's 8 points behind in the Fox poll. And so Youngkin seems to be surging, but there are a lot of people who have already voted, so McAuliffe might win on the basis of his early votes.
But wait, I don't get the connection.
The connection would be it would be like Eric Cantor losing and killing immigration reform. Okay, that was such a shock.
You're saying if McAuliffe loses on Tuesday, that's going to blow up this legislation?
That's what they're worried about. And I'm not quite sure it will happen, even if McAuliffe loses. But Cantor did blow up immigration. I mean, I don't think it would have passed anyway, but Cantor lost to this unknown Dave Bratt, who was running on immigration, and Cantor was a big cheese. Nobody expected him to lose, and he lost. And it was, shockwaves rippled, and immigration was dead. Nothing's going to happen. So this would not be quite that bad because the guy who's running against McAuliffe isn't running on Biden's Build Back Better, and that it's a terrible bill, but it would still be a shock, and Democrats would freak out, and the timid moderates would say, why are we voting on this thing that's going to get us in trouble like Obamacare got us in trouble?
That seems like such a reach.
That's the worry. That's what they were worried about.
Well, if there were, first of all, it seems like a reach. I don't know. That seems like a bizarre interpretation of the results of a McAuliffe loss. But secondly, if they're so worried, why don't they get this thing passed before Tuesday?
Well, they tried because that was the whole point. They tried to get it passed.
Okay, but wait. Now, this is at odds with a tweet of yours. Okay. Can I read the tweet that your whole analysis here seems somewhat at odds with?
On this issue, but go ahead.
Pretty recently, apparently.
Yeah.
Today, you quote tweeted Tony Fratto, who said both infrastructure and reconciliation will pass, but they can't pass until everyone gets to prove to their partisans they fought to the very end and get all they could. Blah blah blah. And you said yes, it's all brilliant kabuki. That's the ticket. Which would be, I think, a bad metaphor in any event, unless you actually think this thing was centrally orchestrated from months or at least weeks ago, where everybody was in the same room and Bernie Sanders was, having beers with Joe Manchin saying, this is going to work great, man. So I don't think the kabuki metaphor ever made sense, really. But in any event, you're predicting. I think this is like an hour ago on Twitter or something. When did you tweet this?
About an hour
It's
ago,
like-
yeah.
And now you've done a 180?
No, it was ironic, Bob. I think it's not brilliant kabuki. I think claiming it's brilliant kabuki is Democratic spin. That's bullshit.
Oh my God! You gotta.
Well, if
all
you say
these
that's the ticket, that is a sign. Irony. That's the ticket. That's John
Mickey,
Lovitz's irony.
You and all the other people on Twitter who think that everyone on Twitter, or even like 70% of the people reading their tweets, know them so well they'll get their sarcasm. You're living in a past golden age. I recognize at the New Republic we had a clear, coherent readership. They knew our voice. They got our jokes. This is different. You're
Bob,
just asking to be misunderstood.
I'm worried about you. I had two indicia of irony in that tweet. One, there was an exclamation point. Two, it said, that's the ticket. I couldn't have driven it home any harder unless I said, this is irony. Okay?
Mickey, do you realize that everyone...
You're in the bottom 10% of my readers here.
Everyone under the age of 35 uses exclamation points earnestly. They are not signs of irony.
Yes, but when I use them, they're signs of irony.
I see, and you expect all these 34-year-olds to be so familiar with your oeuvre.
No, but I expect you to be familiar with my oeuvre. Anyway, it's an interesting question of why would the Democrats melt down? People like Greg Sargent say it's irrational, but just as he points out, just because it's irrational doesn't mean they're not going to do it. The congressmen are timid and they don't want to get wiped out in a wave. And there is a legitimate rationale for it. I mean, even though Youngkin is campaigning mainly on school issues and critical race theory and maybe some transgender issues in the schools, there is a general sort of stop the madness vibe to the anti-McAuliffe.
There's no madness left in this bill.
Stop the madness vibe to the anti-Build Back Better.
What's the madness part of this legislation, Mickey?
The
Now that they've gutted
the legislation is that voters weren't demanding it. This is the pent up. This whole legislation, not the infrastructure, which is what Pelosi was desperately trying to pass, so they could at least have some victory. But the big social spending bill is the pent up demand of the Washington liberal think tanks. There's nothing the voters wanted. The voters want Biden to focus on COVID and the economy, and instead he's passing this big wish list of Washington think tanks that does not address their concerns. Worse, it is a big wish list because it's the last gasp wish list of a party that thinks it's going to lose Congress next year. So
what are the big items?
It's doubly separated from the voters' concern, and that's the madness.
What are the big items in the bill that nobody wants?
As Janan Ganesh, the world's finest columnist at the Financial Times, pointed out, just because they support something doesn't mean it's salient. Sure, they will say we'd like family leave. That's a good thing. Is that a top issue for them? No, it's not a top issue for them. There's not the least popular thing in the bill is the child tax credit that I don't like. So that's they show 7 provisions in the bill to voters, and they like 6 of them, and the only one they don't like is the permanent child tax credit. They don't know why the government's still throwing money at them after the COVID pandemic is gone.
So they say they like 6 of the 7 items, and you say actually they don't like any of them. They're just confused.
No, I say this, Bob, you're not listening to what I'm saying. I say they like them, but they don't care that much about them. Yes, the direction of their affection is up, but it is not a salient, important issue to them.
Well,
the important issues to them are the economy, inflation, and COVID. That's what they say. That would be the stop the madness.
If they feel they like them, then that doesn't seem to me a bill loaded with ready to ignite a stop the madness counter reaction. There's nothing here they're mad about.
The Democrats are making this incredible fuss over what the voters regard as second order issues. If I said, I don't like your shirt and spend all my time trying to get you to change your shirt, that would be madness, even though I genuinely don't like your shirt.
Okay, so the actual evidence we have is the poll results. You say they're misleading. Do you have any actual evidence for what you're saying?
Well, we'll get the evidence when Terry McAuliffe
so the answer
gets
is no.
clobbered in Virginia.
Okay. Well, I think that'll be a misreading, but as of now, you have
falling steadily. I mean, there's that.
Well, yeah, the bill hasn't passed. It looks like the Democrats are in complete disarray. Of course they're falling.
Right, but then you have to
So there's no evidence now that you can cite to back up your point of view. Well, unless we take the fact that Terry McAuliffe, who said the stupidest thing you could say in a debate and got punished for it, and that started a downhill slide, is in the midst of a downhill slide. Aside from that, which you're putting this bizarre interpretation on, there's no evidence for your perspective at all, right?
Well, there's plenty of evidence showing that voters care most about the economy and COVID and inflation. I mean, there's there's so much polling evidence that it's sort of accepted. I think
I'm not denying that, but you're saying that these things that they say they like actually are they consider madness.
Do you see any overwhelming public push to Congress? You have to pass this social policy bill. No, there's not.
Well, I think first of all, I mean, they dropped some things for reasons I don't understand that I think nobody doesn't like, pretty much, like free community college. I don't know why they dropped that. A lot of people like it.
I'm ready to go plank by plank and rate each provision up or down, Bob.
Let's don't do that to our audience. But the audience
it just seems to me when we put in a lot of work, Bob.
Not on boring things.
Not
on boring things. Not work on boring things.
You say how could this be boring? You're saying the voters are demanding it.
No, I just said they're fine with it. I just said I don't see the stop the madness thing going on here. I don't. That's your interpretation. Is that
yes?
Voters all over America want to stop the craziness embodied in this bill, even though they say they like 6 out of 7 things. Okay.
No, the craziness isn't embodied in the bill. The craziness is. It's like you saying, why do I spend all my effort trashing the left? Why does Biden spend all his efforts on this bill that is a second order bill? It's not that we don't like the bill. It's the expenditure of the effort that is bothering us. The fact that he's fucking it up the way he fucked up the withdrawal from Afghanistan is the second point.
That is the reaction of someone who's following this stuff obsessively, which you do as a journalist and almost nobody else does. They're not sitting there thinking, why is he spending so much? I mean, you're caught up in pundit world here.
No, that's the reaction of voters who don't understand it but say, why are they going on and on about this? I don't care about this. That's what
you're saying is the reaction.
Wrong. It's the perspective of people who just see all this fuss and say, what's all this fuss?
But you don't have evidence of that either. I'm just saying you're projecting your own views on the electorate here.
Of course.
And you're extrapolating wildly from a race in Virginia that has its own dynamics.
I'm not sure it'll work, but as you know, I've gone back and forth as to whether this will have a Chernobyl-like effect. I'm saying why it might work and why Democrats might be worried that it would work. And the upshot would be, if it has this effect, they don't get either bill. So the funny thing is completely fucked because they don't get either bill. That would be the Chernobyl meltdown.
The funny thing is that if there's going to be extrapolation from a McAuliffe loss, I would think it would be about issues that aren't, so far as I know, directly implicated in this bill. CRT, are they teaching wokeness in our schools? All that stuff. That's what people are going to talk about if McAuliffe loses. They're not going to be talking about parental leave. They're not going to say Terry McAuliffe lost because he favors parental leave. Nobody's going to say that but you.
There's just going to be a generalized freakout. That would be the argument. It's not just me. It's in Punchbowl AM, Bob. This is halfway to being conventional wisdom, and that's why it happened, because Pelosi believes it too, and they're worried about it. What's your explanation for why they did this ridiculous routine this week?
Well, they have the problem of having only 50 votes in the Senate, and 2 of them are people who shouldn't be Democrats. That's the problem.
But they didn't have to. They didn't have to make a big effort for the hard infrastructure bill this week. They could have just done nothing. They could have.
Well, I assume it's a desperation measure. I assume Pelosi thought it would work. It's the second time she's tried it, right?
She has plenty of time. She could wait until after the Virginia governor's race. And the answer is because she was worried about the Virginia's governor's race.
No, Biden very much wanted to have the climate stuff before he left for Glasgow.
Oh,
there was that push coming from the White House. What?
That's talk about a second order issue. I mean, he could say, "Oh yeah, we got that. We're going to pass it next month."
Well, I mean, you're citing mainstream reporting. Everybody's reporting what I just said.
Well, the Democrats are putting that out.
You don't think it makes you?
I don't think it makes. I think the world leaders get together and they don't. Are they going to say, "And you can't even pass your climate thing through Congress"? I don't think that.
Yeah, absolutely. That is what he was worried about, and I totally get why. I mean, he wants to turn this into a success, And in theory, I mean, remember, like Xi Jinping's not going to be there. I don't think Putin's going to be there. And so if he doesn't shine, it's kind of a pretty embarrassing because those guys didn't even show up.
So that makes it even less important that he comes armed with a infrastructure bill because they're not going to.
No, it puts pressure on him to show that even without them. I mean, remember, I think Xi Jinping is, by not showing up, is saying, look, if you keep hectoring us about issues we consider internal issues, and not our external behavior toward the world, we're not going to play ball. And I think he very much needs to show them that even if you don't play ball, I can turn this into a stage that I triumph on. What's wrong with that argument?
You're doing exactly the same thing that the neocons
that you're doing?
And the Blob always does, which is the U.S. must assert itself on the world stage. We must shine on the world stage. That's always like half bullshit.
Mickey, I'm not saying
you don't have to shine on the world stage.
Mickey, I'm saying he's thinking that, and he is in the Blob, so it makes sense that he's been would be thinking
that. It is possible that he takes this global warming bullshit seriously, but no.
Oh, he totally wants this to be. It's a trip abroad. He wants this to be a big success. It will be embarrassing for him. You will see a lot of coverage of how embarrassing it is.
Well, okay, that's a possible alternative explanation for the insanity. But I like my explanation better.
I also think they probably fear just loss of momentum, and rightly so. They're very, very close. They've got how many? Do they have 2,000-page agreement?
Yep. But it's 2,500. But it's not. It's they produced a framework and then part of the text. So I don't quite know what they produced. But it's obvious there are whole issues that haven't been resolved yet. So it's obviously not done.
Okay, but by the way, here's what I heard. Tell me if this is true. John Harwood, noted reporter. Is he still at the Wall Street Journal? Anyway.
I think he's at the New York Times and CBS. Maybe just CBS.
Okay. Anyway, he tweeted yesterday, if Senators Manchin and Sinema or late last night, if Senators Manchin and Sinema were willing this morning to explicitly embrace the framework, that is this epic thing, that had been tailored to their specifications, the bipartisan infrastructure bill would have passed tonight. For whatever reason, they simply weren't. It wasn't about the House progressives. So he's got a theory that where, I guess Nancy Pelosi scheduled a vote thinking she could win, and Manchin and Sinema, I don't know how abjectly they want progressives to surrender, but apparently even more abjectly than they've already surrendered.
Well,
and that's his interpretation.
Well, the progressives
What's wrong
just
with
saw
that?
through the bullshit. I don't blame the progressives in the sense that Pelosi was trying to snow them, and they didn't want to play kabuki. They actually wanted to play reality, and they saw that if Sinema and Manchin say we approve the framework, but the framework isn't negotiated, does it have a Medicaid expansion or Medicare expansion or not? What does it mean when they say they support it?
Wait, I want to be clear. Harwood is saying Manchin and Sinema refused to endorse the framework. That's his explanation. He's saying it had nothing to do with the progressive.
But I'm saying it's crazy, even if they had endorsed the framework. The progressives were rightly paranoid that doesn't mean anything because the framework is not finished yet. What if they have a dispute over Medicare? What does it mean to say I endorse the framework? And once the progressives pass the hard infrastructure bill, they lose their leverage in the dispute over Medicare. So why would they want to do that, even if Manchin and Sinema said we support the framework?
Well, it's conjectural. I mean, if Manchin and Sinema didn't support the framework
from this onslaught of abuse they're getting, which is unfair, I agree.
But wait. I mean, so you agree that Manchin and Sinema did refuse to endorse the framework?
Yeah, they issued and Bernie Sanders refused to endorse the framework. It was a completely premature, and the question is, was it just because Biden? Keep in mind, was it just because Biden wanted somebody to take to Glasgow that he made this embarrassing trip to the Hill, and they put this thing before the House that they sort of knew wasn't going to pass, and they tried to snow them. But then Biden in the end didn't even ask for their vote. It was all a very bizarre performance.
Well, I think a big part of the story here is that, I mean, basically, first of all, this whole escapade looks like legislation used to look when it was a case of bipartisan agreement you get. You'd get all this public, you introduce it, you modify it, blah, 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 blah. What's weird about this is that it's gone on this long, it's epic, they're still not on the same page, and it's all intra-party. That's what's unusual about this. And I just think, people talk about the breakdown of trust between red and blue. Well, there's a breakdown of trust within the Democratic Party between progressives and moderates, although there aren't that many moderates maybe, but and that's why, I mean, shit, if you've got 2,500 pages in writing and you can't, come to an agreement, you don't have enough trust in the word of one another, in the commitments of one another to just kind of talk out the rest and agree to it. That's new. There used to be just more trust among legislators, especially within the same party, but even between parties. It's the tribalism is getting more and more fine-grained.
I'm not sure there's certainly a little bit of that's true, but the difference is this is, the debate I watched closely was the welfare reform debate, okay? And that took a couple of months, and it had backs and forces and people shifting coalitions, and people on the left tried to push the bill to the right so that it wouldn't pass. It's like it was all sorts of crazy stuff. But the difference between this is because reconciliation is now the only way to get around the filibuster. This is like 10 welfare reform bills. They don't usually try something this big, and it's very unwieldy, and so you knew it was going to take a long time. But the question is, why don't they let it take a long time? Why do they have to keep trying to jam it down the throat of the progressives? And my explanation is they're worried about Virginia. Your explanation
it's already been a long time, and I think there is such a thing as loss of momentum, and they do have to keep moving forward. And I think Glasgow has a lot to do with it. It could well be that there's I would say there's another kind of connection it could have to the Virginia election, is that they want to give this to Terry McAuliffe.
Yeah.
He'll be a Democrat. He'll be part of a party that gets things done. Right. That makes sense.
No,
that makes sense to me.
That was part of what I meant. They want to help McAuliffe, and they like McAuliffe because he's a Democrat, but they're also worried that if he loses, it'll be Chernobyl.
No, wait. I think these two explanations are at odds. If you're saying on the one hand, you just agreed with me that passing this bill would be an asset for McAuliffe.
Well, they thought that. I agree that they thought that.
And yet, the reason, if he loses, it'll be because everybody wants to stop the madness in this bill. So the voters will like this bill if it's passed. What? I don't get it. Do they hate it or do they like it?
They like the hard bill and they don't like the soft bill. The hard bill is the one. The hard bill is the one they'd give to McAuliffe to pass. The madness is the soft bill.
So their plan was to pass the hard bill and not pass the soft bill before Tuesday?
The only reason she made noises that they were going to pass them both simultaneously, but that was insane. And that was just to get the progressives to pass the hard bill. So yes, I
certainly buy the one theory.
They wanted to help McAuliffe, and one of the reasons they wanted to help McAuliffe is because they're a little worried that if he loses big, everything will fall apart.
Well, I could kind of see that. They want to use hard infrastructure to help him win, and they think his winning will help soft infrastructure.
Yeah. and his losing would
okay, but
would severely damage soft infrastructure.
That makes sense to me, but I don't think I'm buying. I'm still not buying. I don't think I have to buy the stop the madness hypothesis for that to make sense to me. But anyway,
well, it's the only way. It's the only way to analogize it to Cantor, because Cantor, it specifically was about immigration, and this is not specifically about Build Back Better. So I have to resort to gauzy notions.
Mustn't abandon any beliefs that are vital to analogizing it with Cantor. We can't let go of that analogy. So whatever, you just tell me what I have to believe for that analogy to work, and I will profess commitment to it.
But like I say, it's not just me. There are a lot of people in Washington who think that McAuliffe's loss, if that happens, might be a disaster for Biden. I don't quite understand it, but there are people who think that. And
so anyway, we have peace in our time. You and I agree that the election Tuesday is related to what's going on here. Yeah.
You don't want to go provision by provision? It's so exciting.
No, I don't. No, please.
We have the
no mas.
We have the child tax credit, which is a disaster. We have the community college thing, which is dead. We have the parental leave, which is a disaster and dead. Which is the community college thing? Your pet thing was apparently killed by the 4-year colleges who ganged up against it.
Elites, once again, elites ganging up against it. And that's no joke. This is elites subverting the interests of the common.
That's what everybody says, but why would the 4-year colleges hate the community colleges?
Well, you don't think the 4-year colleges killed it, or you just don't
No, that's what it says, but why? But I don't quite understand the rationale. Is it there's a certain customer? I assume the 4-year colleges think we're so elite that we would never have those crappy students to go to community colleges.
Oh, no, there's such a broad spectrum of 4-year colleges. There's 4-year colleges that are, in terms of the education you get, are barely distinguishable from community colleges. I mean, and they feel there's a lot of competition. I mean, and if you can go to 2 years of college for free, that's a competitive threat to colleges that want to charge you. Yeah. Sure.
I guess that's right. Thank you for answering my question. The one interesting thing, two interesting things. At least two of these planks were savagely and persuasively attacked by the left.
So we are going through all 7. How long have we been doing?
I'm short-circuiting it here.
Okay.
And David Dayen of the American Prospect, who writes very sort of, he does the homework and he writes very intelligently and in nuanced fashion about these provisions, wrote an op-ed for the New York Times saying this is a disaster because, you could have simple things. We want things like the child tax credit where the government just sends you money, simple, no strings attached. Instead, we have things like the parental leave program where you have to first find out if your employer provides parental leave and then apply to your state. And then if that doesn't work, you apply to the feds. And it was like, basically, if you could apply for parental leave, you would be eligible for a salary 3 times what you'd be getting. So and that's all well and good. But of course, the classic, he proposes a test of simplicity. The classic plan that failed that simplicity test is Obamacare. Way too complicated. It divides the country into 3 tiers. There's at the bottom, there's the Medicaid tier. At the top, there are people with private insurance. And in the middle, there are people in the Obamacare exchanges. And in the Obamacare exchanges, there are 57 different options: red, gold, blue, silver. And you have to change every year if you want to, keep the cheapest option. It's a complete madhouse, to use that word again. And so, sometimes the Democrats feel, and it's still alive, that people haven't revolted against it. So, that seems like a big exception to the Dayen rule.
Okay.
Such a powerful point here. You're reduced to silence.
How many more do we have to go?
I'll stop now. I'll do whatever exciting topic you want to bring up.
Well, let's see. We've got COVID. We've got I don't have that many things. We could, if we run out of things, we could revert to the details of this legislation. But there's something I don't understand. So on the COVID front, there was a piece in Vanity Fair about a week ago, and this was reported elsewhere, saying this has to do with the lab leak hypothesis. Okay, so the EcoHealth Alliance you're familiar with.
They're the villains.
They are, in some scenarios, the villains. It's a group that they had gotten grant. They were involved in research in the Wuhan lab. They had gotten grants from the U.S. government related to that, and so on. And the leader of the alliance, who I think is Australian or something, had led the charge against the lab leak hypothesis, and not been totally transparent, I think, about their interest, although maybe it was a matter of public record. But, that included like writing a letter to Lancet, the medical journal, saying, we stand by our colleagues. And by the way, they used an exclamation mark there, which is a weird thing in a letter to a medical journal. We stand by our colleagues, exclamation point. They were not using it, ironically. That was earnest. And so now they're reporting as news, and I guess it is in some sense news, that the Alliance had done an experiment that increased the contagiousness of a bat virus. It turns out this couldn't be the COVID virus. And NIH is now acting as if EcoHealth Alliance failed to report this to them. And so for that reason, you can say that Tony Fauci wasn't being misleading in his famous standoff with Rand Paul. Remember when he says, you remember the standoff? But the funny thing is, I think if you look at what Fauci said, so Rand Paul was saying this was gain of function research that you supported. And Fauci says, no, it was not. This was vetted by experts to determine whether it was gain of function research. And it wasn't. And now they're reporting that, this research did have the effect. It did alter the genome and had the effect of increasing the virulence or the contagiousness. I think if you look closely at the exchange between Rand Paul and Fauci, that was all acknowledged. The way the exchange goes is Rand Paul says, so you're saying they could do research, they could change the genes in a way that increases the transmissibility of the virus, and that's not gain of function research? And Fauci says, yes. He says, that is what I'm saying.
What would be gain of function research?
Well, that's the thing is I think what's happened here is that because gain of function research was banned, I think NIH, because they wanted to continue to fund some stuff that was remarkably like it, came up with this very narrow definition of gain of function research. And that's why Fauci says, our experts have vetted this. They said it's not gain of function. Well, that's because they're working with such a narrow definition of gain of function.
That's what everybody said after the hearing. So what's new about this?
That's what I'm asking. What is new? There is something new because the NIH actually released a letter as if there's something new saying, well, the EcoHealth Alliance did do this thing, but they failed to report it to us. So they're now trying to pass the buck on to the EcoHealth Alliance. But this is a new development. The other thing is, in a way, more interesting that I heard, and maybe other people already knew it, but I heard it on a podcast with some Intercept reporters, which was, it's related to the lab leak hypothesis, which is that the, David Baltimore, this eminent, if probably by now kind of elderly figure in molecular biology, said he saw this one sequence in the COVID sequencing and said, this is the smoking gun. I forget what it's called, but this is why he thought it had been genetically altered. there was this huge blowback about people saying, well, it's a little unusual, but why on earth would you want to insert that? If you were doing genetic engineering, what would the logic be? And at some point within the last few weeks, it's come out that there was a proposal to the NIH. And this may be what you were talking about a couple weeks ago. There was a proposal to the NIH to insert exactly that in a bat virus. And the NIH turned them down, so it didn't happen. But the point is, the blowback Baltimore got seems less credible now. And that's that. And I believe maybe that application, by the way, came from EcoHealth too, but I'm not sure about that.
Right. And the thinking is, just because the NIH turned him down doesn't mean it didn't happen. As somebody said,
doesn't mean it.
So one of them said, if you propose painting Central Park pink and I turn you down, and the next week Central Park is suddenly painted pink, you begin to think, well, maybe the person who proposed it actually went ahead and did it anyway, you know?
Yeah, and I think it makes it more credible that somebody did it, maybe without NIH funding. And maybe, in other words, there could have been logic behind inserting this thing that David Baltimore found very suspicious.
But they want to get Fauci. It's sort of hilarious that Fauci, they're going to get him because he killed these beagles.
I miss the beagles.
Sorry?
I miss the beagle story. What did he do?
They approved some sort of grant where they took beagles, sent them to Tunisia or some Middle Eastern country where they were drugged, and some pests like sandflies killed them by eating their heads. Their heads were encased in sort of glass, and the bugs ate their heads. So this is pretty damn cruel. I have a cancel-worthy name for it.
What is that?
Bauschwitz.
BOW?
It's the a name I shall not utter again, but it's caused a lot of.
I'm not endorsing. By the way, I'm not endorsing that joke.
But you did laugh.
I want to be clear.
We were watching closely.
You're trivializing. You're perilously close to trivializing one of the greatest atrocities in human history. But and I don't think I don't recall laughing. Actually, did I laugh?
What?
That was
yes,
patronizing laughter.
You're going to have your minions go back and erase that part of the tape because you definitely laughed.
I was worried about your self-esteem, so I laughed to make you feel better.
That's it. And you were worried about the governor's race in Virginia.
Speaking of which, I did watch part of Dave Chappelle. If we have time in the Parrot Room, we can discuss that. We do have a very special guest in the Parrot Room this week, so we may not have time. But
I haven't sent him a reminder, so I hope he shows up. I'll send him a reminder in the break.
We should tell people who he is, right?
Well, what if he doesn't show up?
Well, then we'll be humiliated.
We'll tell him at the end. How about that?
We'll tell him at the end. So now we have bait to stay until the end, where we will give them bait to go into the Parrot Room.
Right.
This is genius. This is why we are the king of the internet or podcasting or whatever we
nested bait. So there are other things with COVID. It's been discovered that you can be vaxxed and you can spread it just as easily as if you weren't vaxxed. And this sort of makes more possible my nightmare scenario, which is vax people give it to other vax people, and they don't get sick, but it does mutate, and eventually spreading around, it mutates into something really horrible. I guess that threat is always present.
But wait, this is if you were vaxxed like 8 months ago, or if you were just vaxxed? Because
I know it's somebody who within families, they discover that the viral load is as high and it spreads just as easily, although the people don't get sick and die.
Well, my understanding is that, I am resigning myself to getting a booster, but the only reason, I don't need one. It's been 8 months since my Pfizer. I don't need a booster, I don't think, to shore up my, insulation against death or hospitalization. That stays pretty robust, but I am now much more likely to get a version of the illness that doesn't kill me, and therefore to be able to transmit it. And I'm only doing this because at Thanksgiving I'm going to be in the presence of an in-law in their 90s, and but I wouldn't do it otherwise. So my question is, my understanding was that 2, 3, 4 months after vaccine, you are much less likely.
I don't think that's true. I think
Really?
I think this study disproves specifically that. Yeah. Around here they give you a test for antibodies, and if your antibodies are robust, they don't give you a booster.
By the way, the death rate finally did start falling in America after a mysterious plateau,
and
it's under
right.
1,500 per day. Yeah.
And in California, it's falling smartly. The other thing is, remember when I told you about Lovox? Well, Lovox has now been confirmed to be effective in some sort of study. Not 100% effective, but if you can tolerate it and you can follow the instructions, 2/3 effective, which is pretty good.
It's treatment or prophylactic?
It's a treatment.
Lovox?
Yeah.
I'll be there.
And it also cures OCD and depression. So it's like the only pill you need, Bob, or the only pill I need.
OCD is not a big problem, but if it's an antidepressant, count me in. By the way, the caseload now, our caseload has started to level off after dropping, so that's a little concerning. But death rate finally falling, as we would have expected it to be doing all along after a pause. Yeah.
We have war with Iran, war with China. Steve Bannon.
Do we?
In January 6th.
That's a lot. So now war with China. There's one thing I meant to mention when we were discussing Taiwan is we were talking about strategic ambiguity. Why should Biden not say we're definitely going to defend Taiwan? In a way, the chief reason is saying that, by one reckoning, saying that makes it more likely that China will invade Taiwan. Because, we don't like to think of so-called autocrats as being under popular pressure, but they always are. And there's a lot of popular sentiment in mainland China for the idea that Taiwan's part of China and that its ultimate destiny is to be reintegrated into China. And there is the argument that the more, kind of posturing the U.S. does, or anybody does, about you can't have Taiwan and you never will, the more pressure there is on Xi Jinping to do something. So that's just an argument I failed to mention about why it might be counterproductive for Biden to say the thing that he said, I think mistakenly, but, and in general, for, for us to do various other things that, yeah.
Did you read Bret Stephens' column on our eroding global position?
No.
It was,
but I can guess.
You could guess, and the problem is
he's against it.
It's fairly predictable, but it's like quite a litany of Afghanistan, Syria, Iran. We're letting them get away with various things. One of them is the drone attack in Syria. He doesn't question why we're in Syria.
Wait, what drone attack? What drone attack?
There was some drone attack on an American training base that we have yet to retaliate for. And anyway, it was a plea for it was basically an attack on Blinken, although it didn't name him. It sort of said, we need the grown-ups like Bob Gates back in charge. Enough with these amateurs.
I think Bret Stephens in his heart wants more than Bob Gates.
True. But anyway, it made me think that yes, we've been in situations like this before, and the reaction of the president has been some gratuitous show of force, like invading Grenada or the Mayaguez attack that Ford did after we pulled out of, I think it was after we pulled out of Vietnam, to show that, yeah, we can take over an oil tanker, damn it. And that's usually done the job. So I don't think it's all that big a deal, but a small gratuitous show of force is probably something I might endorse if it would do the job.
Yeah. There was a piece in The Nation by Trita Parsi and a couple of other people who said Biden should seize the momentum from the withdrawal from Afghanistan and go ahead and get troops out of Syria and Iraq, arguing that he's now kind of paid the political cost he's going to pay, and B, this basically these things have good effects. That you get out of Afghanistan, and now stabilizing Afghanistan is the job of China and Pakistan, whoever else, and God bless you, good luck. And you reduce our presence in the Middle East, and it makes Iran and Saudi Arabia more likely to come to terms with the fact that they have a joint interest in stabilizing the region. And there are at least some signs of that. I think it's a good argument.
Do you think Biden actually wants to get out of Syria?
I doubt he thinks about it much. I don't know. I mean, it's one of these plainly illegal, in terms of international law things. We're there without the permission of the government.
I think he does want to get out of Iraq, but you sort of say, why doesn't he go ahead with it? Because he's never thought about going ahead with it.
Well, I mean, there are complications. I mean, it's tempting to stay there because this is some of the richest part of Syria. I don't know exactly how the oil revenues flow there, but they're flowing to somebody other than the Syrian government. And I guess we still have hopes of, toppling the government, although I have no idea why anybody would think that's a good idea at this point. And then there's this ticklish issue with the Kurds, whether their security would be jeopardized. There are these transitional questions. I don't know if it's on Biden's mind, but this is not. I don't know. And then there's the Israel stuff. Israel's done a couple of things lately that, in theory, could draw chastisement from the U.S. government, and I think the U.S. did protest one of them. Very big housing settlement, thousands of units in the West Bank. Also, Israel outlawed 10 Palestinian civil society organizations that I think, for the most part, focused on human rights anyway, and that drew the censure of the human rights community, all the big human rights NGOs. But meanwhile, we are doing Israel's bidding for it with Saudi Arabia. Apparently, Biden is working hard to muscle Saudi Arabia into joining the Abraham Accords, and God knows what we have to. I mean, remember, we have to give things to Saudi Arabia to make that happen. Like, say, okay, you can keep killing people in Yemen or something, or you can keep torturing Saudis. You can do this, you can do that. I mean, this comes at a cost, and that's one of the big frustrations on the progressive side, is that Israel is doing these things that you would think would make life harder for the Biden administration, like the two things I just said. And meanwhile, the Biden administration is compliantly, doing what Israel wants with Saudi Arabia. And I would say with Iran from the beginning, I don't know if it was to please Israel, but the Biden administration's failure to seriously pursue restoring the nuclear deal from the beginning has certainly met with satisfaction.
Has certainly met with Israeli satisfaction.
Yeah.
I thought they did seriously pursue it. They just didn't get it done. You don't think?
No, they never said, why don't we just restore the deal? We had a deal. Trump withdrew. Let's just restore the deal. That might have done wonders. Biden administration never said that. Never. They said, we've got these other things we want that have nothing to do with, with the deal.
I listened to, I read a bit of your dialogue with that guy who was in the Blob.
Tom Wright.
And
no
relation. You were
relation.
talking about, yes, everybody in the Blob is sort of acting in good faith, and I think you agreed with that, but it could still produce perverse results. And I'm sure that's true, but isn't it possible that some dominant ideologies, people could not be acting in good faith, but they could be acting cynically because that's just what you have to do to get ahead and go along? And I'm thinking of communism toward the end. It seems to be the nomenclature were totally cynical about the communist enterprise toward the end in many countries. And it was just a way to feed your family. And also the U.S. engagement in Vietnam, apparently toward the end, nobody really believed in it. It was just, you did your time and you got home safely in theory. And I guess the Blob isn't that bad, but isn't it possible it could become that bad?
Well, I mean, are there people who I'm not saying these people never profess to believe things they don't in their heart believe. I'm saying, I mean, most people do that. I think most people act as if they believe things that they don't. They make noises to please this crowd or that, or to get this objective of that or that. I'm just saying that almost everyone in the Blob, I think, when they do that, feels in their heart it is justified by their larger goal, which they believe is a good goal.
Right. And
I mean, it's not like when I was just saying that, in some realms we seem to be doing Israel's bidding in the Middle East, but I don't think people, anyone who is, if you look at where the political pressure for that comes from, I don't think it comes from people who say, well, I want to subvert American foreign policy. I think it comes from people who think
right.
Israel is, it's a noble cause and it's truly endangered and so on. And that's the way people generally are.
I understand. My question is, have we ever had an ideology, and do we ever have to worry that we'd have a dominant ideology where people actually didn't believe it? Where in their heart of hearts,
I think that can happen.
They realized it was bullshit and they went ahead and implemented it anyway for careerist reasons. And I'm trying to think of areas where that has happened, where the dominant ideology has just been nobody really believed it, and I'm coming up blank.
Well, it's kind of a question of degrees. I mean, one thing though I would say on this line is, I would say many, if not most people who agree with me on foreign policy and are anti-Blob use the term empire a lot to talk about U.S. foreign policy aspirations. I don't use it because although America has a kind of de facto neo-empire. It's not an old-fashioned empire. We actually run all these countries, but you can say it's kind of imperial in effect. But I don't think many people responsible for the policy actually have that as a conscious goal.
Right.
And it's a mistake. It's great for getting Twitter followers to say that they do, but I just think it's a mistake that handicaps you when you try to do something about it.
I guess American policy toward Cuba, the official American policy, was a little like what I am talking about, because the State Department obviously didn't really believe it. Everybody just assumed it was done to placate the crazy Cubans in Miami. So.
Oh, well, yeah,
that would be an example of a policy nobody really believed.
Well, but the Cubans believe it. I mean, the places the pressure come from, the people who apply the ultimate pressure, the ultimate lobbying pressure. I mean, there's all kinds of people involved in that who don't hold the sincere belief, like the lobbyists themselves, maybe, right? Who are hired. But the Cubans believe they're on the side of right. The Cubans in Florida.
And I think obeisance to Trump is another one where at least half the people who do it think it's bullshit, but they have to do it in order to do their other things.
Right. I mean, exactly. I mean, Mitch McConnell tells himself that ultimately he is serving good.
No, Mitch McConnell has broken with Trump. He doesn't obey him at all. That he's a bad example.
There's things he believes. Well, for a long time he wouldn't cross him, and there are lots of things he believes about him that he still won't say.
He did, but there was a break.
Relatively
after
speaking,
Georgia.
But he doesn't talk about it much.
He actually pisses on Trump with some regularity.
What else did you?
I have something to talk about Trump, but maybe it's something for later about whether there is a character on the American scene who can actually fill the role that you suggested. It was one way to get Trump, which is have somebody run against him, not from the left of the Republican Party, but from even crazier on the right, and say Trump isn't the real. Trump is a milquetoast. He doesn't believe in replacement theory. I really believe in replacement theory, and that would like cripple him.
Yeah.
And I have a candidate, but
of course, be careful what you wish for. But who is the candidate?
Tucker. He's setting himself up as the Zemmour.
Yeah, but that's what
Zemmour is the guy in France who's running to Le Pen's right and doing her tremendous damage. Tucker is setting himself up to be the Zemmour of the United States, should he want to run. It would be hard to break from Trump at Fox News, but Tucker may be bigger than Fox News at some point.
Yeah, but he could, in principle, win. That's a be careful
And
what you wish
bizarrely,
for.
that
I mean,
wouldn't
my
bother me
ideal.
because I know him and I don't think he's that bad.
I think he's just. I don't trust that guy. He seems to be pretty much without principle.
I didn't say you should trust him. He does have principles, but trust is not a word I would use.
What wouldn't he do? What wouldn't Tucker Carlson do?
Well, there are a lot of things he wouldn't do. He's he has a pretty well developed ideology, and he's a patriot, and he's not gonna surrender, surrender Florida to China, California maybe, but not Florida.
That's your big concern about we need to worry about a president who's not sufficiently tough on foreign countries.
No,
that's
I was just
concern. That's not what I'm worried about.
I was groping for examples.
Yeah. I think that's where you have to look if you want to look for something he wouldn't do.
No, because he's actually fairly anti-interventionist now. He's with you, Bob. You're strange bedfellows.
So he says, and he may be, but that's not my concern either. We've had this argument. It's boring. I just think he would do anything. He would do anything.
One of us has worked for him. Let's put it that way.
One of us quit in protest of him.
That's why I say don't trust him.
So we're on the same page. You don't trust him. I don't trust him.
But I don't.
What are we arguing
he's
about?
A crappy manager, but I just think they're in terms of his policies, they're not incoherent.
Well, no, you were complaining about his corruption, his lack of journalistic integrity. You were complaining that he laid down a policy that nobody at the Daily Caller was allowed to criticize Fox News because he wanted to be in their good graces. That's a corrupt journalism, a lack of integrity. You admirably quit.
Well, his
wasn't
point
his
is
management.
that
It wasn't his management.
His point is that he was clear about it because he worked for Fox, that you couldn't criticize Fox. Unfortunately, he failed to convey that to me when I signed up. But there were other people on the staff who claimed that they knew about this rule. So.
I've always said the main thing is that you be honest about your lack of integrity.
Well, it's like Mike Kinsley saying,
I admire that in a man.
We're not going to attack Microsoft here at Slate when Slate was owned at Microsoft. If you draw a clear boundary around an area, that's better than if it's vague and mushy and nobody knows whether you're going to pull your punches against Microsoft. If you say, look, sorry, they own us, we're not going to attack them, don't expect it from us, that's sort of better than being vague about it.
Speaking of Microsoft, do you know what the new name of Facebook is?
They turned down my offer. I offered to sell them. What did I offer to sell them?
Kausfiles? You offered them the name Kausfiles?
No, I offered the name. It was like Trollsville. I offered them Trollsville, which I own.
Actually, my newsletter name would be great for them, Nonzero, because they could continue to pretend that that Zuckerberg's in this to help everybody. It's win-win. Anyway, no, they're changing the name to Meta Platforms. You know what that's a reference to?
Meta Platforms?
Yeah, META, not METTA. That METTA is the Pali word for loving kindness. That's what Ron Artest had in mind when he changed his name to Meta World Peace.
He has 2 T's in his Meta?
Yes.
Maybe we should start a Meta with 3 T's, and then we can make it whatever we want.
You read my mind. That's where this is all heading, Mickey. No.
I thought we should do something that implied they're Meta, we are imminent, we're subterranean, we're like, we're all under the surface and not transcending anything. But I couldn't come up with a word other than sub, which has too many meanings.
Submeta world peace. You know what? This is a reference to, though, the metaverse.
Right.
The metaverse. And here's my question. So the metaverse is apparently this, he envisions a future where we're basically living in, it's a kind of virtual reality, but it's interactive. So you and I right now, it would really seem like we're like sitting down and having coffee. Like I would see you and you would seem to be right there. You'd be having coffee. You using the virtual reality shit. And of course, Facebook bought Oculus years and years ago, and I think this was his vision then. And maybe I'm a little wrong about his vision now, but I think that captures some of it. But here's an obscure point I would like to make. So metaverse is, I guess, replacing cyberspace in his scenario. But if I recall correctly, if you look at the original, so metaverse comes from a Neil Stephenson science fiction novel, I think, maybe Snow Crash or something. And cyberspace came from a William Gibson science fiction novel, Neuromancer. And the irony is, if you read Neuromancer, as I recall, cyberspace is the metaverse. It's like he's talking about a virtual reality in Neuromancer that was really not at all like what has been called cyberspace for these many years.
I always thought cyberspace was heading for what he calls the metaverse. I don't see what's actually so new about it. What haven't there been like SimCity and various, reality 2.0 attempts to turn cyberspace into what Zuckerberg would call the metaverse?
Yeah, and Second Life.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he basically just needs a rebranding, but I do think this is where he wants to head. And when you look at it, he's got the tools. Oculus has what is by consensus the best virtual reality headset now. He owns Facebook. He owns Instagram. He owns WhatsApp. I mean, he is the leading candidate to be emperor of the metaverse. And I don't want to live in a metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg is the emperor.
Good point. There's going to be a huge reaction against living in the metaverse, a sort of back to reality movement where people somehow eschew computers and grow their own food. And I mean, it's already happening, but Bob, you want to be the head of that movement. You want to?
No, I want to be the head of the metaverse. I want Mark Zuckerberg to be relegated to farming a small plot of land, which after climate change gets no water. That's what I want. And I ain't giving up.
I think your chances of leading the opposition to the metaverse, the resistance to the metaverse. I assume this dystopian movie has already been made 5 times.
It actually
people getting their child tax credit and wandering around in these Oculus masks, bumping into the walls and not caring because they're so happy in the metaverse.
I'm not sure it's been done. I think maybe you should do it. I think you should write the book, and I should be the actual emperor of the real metaverse.
I think I saw it on cable very late at night.
So that's my tech news update.
We should start an alternative vision called the Digressiverse, where it starts as a coherent conversation and then digresses so much that it approaches the state of entropy.
That would be us. But Mickey, you know how long we've been talking?
I think we've been talking an hour and 2 minutes.
Correct, you are. You know what that means? That means if you've got any short items, you should stick them in. I've got one short one.
Go ahead.
Mine is God bless Louis Dekmar.
Who?
Dekmar. God bless Louis Dekmar, police chief of LaGrange, Georgia, which is not the LaGrange mentioned by ZZ Top in their song. That's in Texas, I think. Anyway, I have been saying for some time, like, why don't cops ever say in this situation, I'm just going to shoot to stop, not to kill. I'm going to shoot at his legs or something. And Dekmar this police chief has created a big controversy by proposing that, apparently, a shoot to incapacitate policy.
Every time that's proposed, you're like ridiculed by the gun-toting right. Anybody with a gun knows that that's futile, that it's a good way to die.
Well, if the person's got a gun, I mean, it depends on what the person has. Like if you see all the time these people with knives and the cops like hit them in the chest. If they've got a knife, I think if you just kind of slow them down, you're in good shape, unless you yourself are in super bad shape. I mean, there's kind of no distinction. If
he had like a shoot for the genitals policy, that would be both humane and terrifying.
Humane? I'm not so sure. Terrifying?
They would live. Anyway.
Look, I've got a telemarketer.
It's a third way solution, Bob.
It says telemarketer on my phone.
It's
Put him on speakerphone.
it's really your mother. No. It's it's a third way solution, Bob.
Hi, is Vanessa there?
Vanessa? No, there's not
Hi,
a
is Vanessa there?
Vanessa who? Do you have a last name? Or just would any Vanessa do? Okay. That was it. That's a strange form of telemarketer.
There are all these telemarketing that are now pre-recorded, and I wonder if they work at all. Are you really supposed to have an hour-long conversation where they've anticipated every answer you're going to give, and you don't realize that the person you're talking, the jovial guy who's asking you to contribute to the policeman's benevolent fund, is in fact a robot?
It's a good question. That sounded a little robotic. Vanessa's friend.
I'm not
so
sure I have a little one.
Well, say a big one really fast.
No, I have.
Or say it and we'll save it for the Parrot Room.
Well, there's the Steve Bannon's role in the January 6th events, and I concede. I've finally gotten my mind to concede that yes, if Steve Bannon were directing insurrectionists to be violent, and he told Trump on the phone, he was talking to Trump, yes, yes, we are going to take out Pelosi and Pence, and then we're going to install you as president. That would be treason and a horrible thing. And if Trump was a party to it, then he would be guilty of all those things too. But there's no evidence that that's actually what happened. And in fact, the evidence that Bob Woodward trotted out this week was went the other way. I mean, Woodward suddenly said, we have all the dots in my book. We just didn't forget it. We just didn't connect them. Well, let me connect them for you. Here are 6 conspiracy points between Bannon and Trump. And one of them was Bannon saying, yes, we're going to tarnish the Biden presidency from the start. Okay. But that's exculpatory because he assumes there will be a Biden presidency, whereas supposedly the idea was he was going to prevent a Biden presidency by force. So if that's the best evidence they have against Bannon, they don't have any evidence.
Okay. I talked about that at some length last time, I think. And I don't think they'll get quite the smoking gun that in the extreme case you would hope for. No. So I kind of agree, but I think he was very complicit. But we can talk about that in the Parrot Room if you want. We can talk. Of course,
but he was complicit in what is the question?
Yeah, well, I did my version of that either last week or the week before, what he was complicit in. And I'm willing to talk more about it in the Parrot Room at patreon.com/Parrot Room. Do you have other things?
Well, Bob, you notice I'm dressed somewhat formally today.
Yeah, wait, we had no opening shtick. Did we have opening? Is that your opening shtick? It's a little late.
Opening shtick.
Oh, right. That was good.
I ordered a magician's hat, but A, it didn't arrive, and B, Pelosi wasn't a magician, so wouldn't have worked anyway. And then I had a fairy wand coming, and that was going to symbolize make-believe, but the make-believe didn't work either. The progressives didn't fall for the make-believe. So wait, you mean our opening shtick fell prey to supply chain issues? You ordered these things, and they haven't gotten there? No, I ordered them last night, and they weren't supposed to arrive till today. So they're probably going to arrive this evening. But anyway, they were. We had the Chernobyl picture. That was my opening shtick.
It was good. It was good. It led to a bitter argument between us, but it was good.
Yeah, that's good. No, I dressed because this is sort of the way, although in black, that the Velvet Underground dressed. They were very formal and dignified, and if you, the more you read about them and hear about them, the more the word dignity crops into the discussion. It's sort of like they were classical musicians playing this incredibly noisy and chaotic version of rock and roll. And I've seen the documentary.
You have seen the new documentary. Yeah. You've seen the new documentary. And we can talk about that.
I'm ready to talk about it, but you haven't seen it, right?
No, but I have seen the Dave Chappelle now, so we can each say a little bit. And you've already seen Dave Chappelle, and then I will vow to actually watch a substantial part of Velvet Underground, and then come back next week in the Parrot Room and argue with you about whatever you say this week in the Parrot Room, and say that it's wrong, which it is.
This is this is appealingly confusing, as should be in the Digressiverse. That we're
Now, should we tell people who our very special guest is, assuming he shows up?
sure.
Walter Kern.
Walter Kern, who's one of the great.
Interesting for a number of reasons.
Right. What are your reasons?
Names. Well, he wrote the book on which the movie, the George Clooney movie, Up in the Air, was based, which I think is an interesting. It's not unrelated to the Trump phenomenon that emerged later, and Walter turns out to have a certain amount of Trumpist sympathy. You would know more about his specific ideology than I would, but you and him are buddies. You guys
I don't know that much. We're friends. He's a distinguished fiction writer and also a sort of unique voice on the scene. He's Trump sympathetic, but I'm sure he doesn't fall for Trump's bullshit. He lives in the heartland. He voices sentiments of people who live there and sort of don't care about the fuss in Washington. He's also one of the great talkers of our time. I mean, we had an epic debate where we ganged up on Virginia Heffernan in Las Vegas. And basically, I stepped to the side and let him and Virginia duke it out. And it was an incredibly good show, I thought.
Yeah.
Some people.
He's a frequent guest on, for example, I think Greg Gutfeld's now highly rated show on Fox. Highly rated.
And I wanted to talk to him about that.
You know what I want to talk to him about, Mickey? This. You know what that is?
That is the 125th anniversary of the New York Times Book Review.
Right. I'm going to ask him, he's a literary, guy, a novelist, majored in like English or comp lit or something at Princeton, and something of a Trumpist. And I'm going to say, Walter, how do you feel about the fact that the New York Times, if you look at the books whose reviews they dredged up over the past 125 years, they came up with a white male quotient of about 25%. I've got a feeling that Walter may say that over the last 125 years, white male authors deserve a higher representation than 25%, but maybe I'm wrong.
He could say that. I'm not sure that's a big shtick of his, but he could say that.
I'll bet. Don't tell him I'm going to say this. Well, he won't know. But I'm going to try to goad him into an outburst that will make all my outbursts seem tame. I've
never found it hard to goad him into an outburst.
Excellent.
I think it requires too much goading. He's very eloquent and passionate. I wanted to talk a little about Huma Abedin's claim that a senator made a pass at her, an awkward pass.
Wait, Huma, is she the one who was the wife of?
Yes, Anthony Weiner.
Excellent.
A good question. What right does she have to complain about an awkward pass when her husband was?
Yeah, surely this guy compares favorably with
Exactly.
Anthony Weiner. Her life is getting better.
Yeah. She should have made the switch. Mort Sahl passed away.
Yeah, he would be the kind of guy you'd have views on, and I wouldn't.
I don't have that many views, but I have some views.
Yep.
They're figuring out how to make test tube babies. They're this close, Bob.
How close? I thought they were already making them, but we'll talk about it.
Maybe they're already making them.
Tube. Now we may not get to all these before Walter shows up.
Anyway,
but
that's
we'll
what's on my list.
And then Walter will show up, we hope.
I have a friend who gave up their electric car. First person I've met who gave up their EV.
And if people want to know why, there's only one way they can find out.
Right,
And that's
exactly.
to go to patreon.com/parrotroom And I have I have learned so much about the Honda CR-V hybrid and the Toyota RAV4 hybrid that you will be put to shame. I know so much more than you do. And you call yourself like a car guy. I know so much more about
It's endlessly
these cars
fascinating to me, Bob, and I'm sure it's endlessly fascinating to our viewers. They want to know about the Honda CR-V crossover.
You laugh, but wait and see how the Patreon numbers go up now that I've said that. Okay?
Actually, talking about cars got good reviews from our readers. However, talking about your dogs, Bob, got decidedly mixed reviews.
There were many. Oh, that's the other thing I'm going to talk about. Frazier bit me big time. Took a long time to stop the bleeding. I forgive him. He is old, blind, and demented.
I have all sorts of
I'll
retorts
talk
to
about that.
I will not.
Bonus content, folks. Play-by-play of my dog bite. Writing it down.
We're losing them. We're losing them right and
We
left.
should go before we impress them more. Okay.
Okay. See you there.
On a Parrot Room. See you there.